So if we can ask everyone to take their seats so we begin our next discussion. I think all the panelists are ready. We just need the rest of our members to join us. And I think I will go ahead and begin because I know we're under tight time pressure to have lunch served, but we'll begin our next session. It's a new European Union shaped by war. And first, I want to thank our esteemed co-chairs, President Viktor Freiberger and Dr. Ismail Sarageldin, for your leadership in organizing this great event. You know, it's been almost 3 years since the large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. This brought a full-scale war to the European continent. The last war of this magnitude in Europe was World War II. So it's been a long time since we've seen this kind of conflict in Europe. This also presented a challenge for the UN. It's a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has challenged the fundamentals of the US Charter. While other countries have invaded member states, including my own, the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the US did not formally declare an annexation of Iraq as their own sovereign territory. So we're looking at something, you know, completely different, I think, today than what we faced in the past. So what I'd like to do, I'll keep my remarks short, but in today's discussion, is to focus on the European Union and how European Union member states envision a redefinition of their own strategy on peace and security. Do they need a redefinition, and how do they envision it? And also to look at the economics of the Union and sustainable development. So what I'd like to do then is to begin with our esteemed panel, and each panelist will make remarks. If we do have some time, we'll take some questions, but we need to be prompt so that we can begin lunch as soon as we can on time. So our first panelist is Benita Ferrero-Waldner, the Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs of Austria from 2000 to 2004, and also European Commissioner for External Relations and Policy, and European Commissioner for Trade and European Neighborhood Policy. So, Madam Minister, I'll turn the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, we have heard in which world we are today. So therefore, we have a lot of global competition. And therefore, we in the European Union also, we have to be much stronger if we want to be strategic global players. And therefore, indeed, the last strategy of the European Union was made by the High Representative Joseph Borrell. He then built on the strategies that had been there already. There was one by Javier Solana in 2003, and there was the second one in 2016 by Federico Mogherini. But his strategy in 2022 was, of course, already built after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it's called the Strategic Compass for Security and Defense. The idea is indeed to make the European Union stronger and also to enhance strategic autonomy of the European Union. Now, let me quickly make 7 points that I think are important and then go and elaborate a little bit of them. The first is, as I said, we now have to have a much stronger security and defense system. Second, we also need security and preparedness union that we should do, and I will come to that. Third, we should also go on with enlargement and also with closer cooperation with allies around the world. Fourth, we have to strengthen our economy, because only if there is a solid economic basis, then one can be strong, one can be competitive, and here we have to do a lot because we have lost on competitivity. And we should also complete the capital union, and we also should go for a new economic foreign policy. Finally, not finally, there is also the migration issue, which is a very, very complex and difficult issue, but this is there. Then, of course, we should stick to our democracy, to our values, to our human rights, and that also means to multilateralism. We have been speaking a lot about multilateralism today, but I think we always have been and we will be strong supporters of the international order and multilateralism, as has been seen also as the Summit of the Future. And then I would say one of the most important questions is indeed the question of financing, because if there is no finance, how can we go on with all the reforms that we should have to do? Now, on the first point, we need to create a true European defense union. President von der Leyen already appointed, as you might know, a defense commissioner, and this one has to cooperate very closely with Mrs. Kaja Kallas, the new High Representative. Here there should be common foreign and security policy together with the European security and defense policy. Essential will be the reinforcement of the cooperation of our EU-NATO partnership, so to say, the EU defense pillar. That means support and coordinate efforts to strengthen the defense industrial base and also the single market. But the EU has been exposed to chronic underinvestment, especially in the security and defense part, and also to inefficient spending. Therefore, we have to significantly increase investment, that means money, that means budget, and defense budgets are still predominantly spent until now on the national basis, but a rather small part only goes to joint procurement, and the great majority of defense acquisition by member states are still made outside, of course, a lot from the United States of Europe. Now, what has been done after the Russian aggression was using something that has been there, but it has never been used for military use, and that was the European Peace Facility, the EPF. And here, the European Union has been purchasing arms and also military equipment. At the beginning, there had been there 5.7 billion euros for the whole multilateral multi-framework, that means for the budget. But already in the year January 2024, 17 billion had been already spent. So you see, the European Union has, of course, increased that. Now, it is important that we use also the European Defence Fund. This has already been created by Federica Mogherini, and she also did something very interesting. This was the so-called PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation. That means a voluntary cooperation. Here now, military mobility is also important, particularly in critical areas such as naval, ground, air combat, space-based, early warning, and cyber. Now, what is our task? We have to replenish, we have to rebuild, and we have to transform also national armed forces. We also have to invest much more in the defense industry. European defense industry programs should then incentivize common procurement. And we should go for a single market for defense products and services that should be created. Now, in the end, all our resources of the member states should be pooled through the EU Defence Union projects that could focus particularly on the most difficult issues, that is for cross-border threats, maybe therefore I would mention the air shield and also cyber defense. And what is necessary, I think it has been said also before by others, of course it cannot only be public, but there has to be a lot of private investment that should come. This is number one. Number two, crisis and security preparedness. Here I would say there will be a special report from Sauli Niinistö, former Finnish president who will speak or who will prepare things on civilian and military preparedness. And here I think they focus particularly on cyber defense capabilities and also on preventing and preparing for new threats in the field of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear security. On the whole, the EU has to work on integrated deterrence. 3, enlargement. Here, as you know, in the past, the enlargement has been a full success. But now we can say it's even a geopolitical imperative because it gives us greater weight and also more influence on the global stage if it's done well. Now, I think we should clearly focus on enlargement with the 6 Western Balkan countries, and then also help getting closer to the accession of all the other countries that aspire to become members of the European Union. But also, one has to say, it has to be merit-based. Now, important is for Ukraine, the Washington Declaration of the recent NATO summit, where the alliance says, and I quote literally, it will continue to support Ukraine on its irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership, as Kiev continues vital work of democratic, economic, and security reforms, and reaffirms that NATO will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met. So that, I think, is very, very important. And furthermore, I think we also have to focus even more on the wider neighborhood. I mean, I was once also neighborhood commissioner, so I know very well what is that. And here, particularly on the Mediterranean, we have seen what happens when the Mediterranean is totally neglected. On the other hand, of course, then there is the economy and the question of economic investment. Here, I would refer to the Draghi report. You know, Mario Draghi gave a report very, very recently, and there he says, we face huge challenges. We would need growth, more growth, even 5% of GDP, according to the levels of 60 or 1960, 1970. And he says, we have to, and it was also mentioned today a lot, digitalize and decarbonize at the same time, and of course strengthen our defense capabilities. Now, we should become more productive. We should at the same time preserve our values of equity and social inclusion. That means there have to be radical changes if we can do it. He prescribes and says, closing the innovation gap with the US and China, especially on advanced technologies, then a joint plan for decarbonization and competitiveness, and increasing security and reducing dependency, especially on rare earths and also minerals. And something that will be very difficult, strengthening governance in the European Union. He means refocusing the work of the European Union, accelerating EU action and integration and simplifying rules. And I think simplification, it will be very, very important because I think we have over-regulated. You know, there is this saying that China is productive or the Americans are productive and we are the ones regulative. Now, migration, fourth point. Here we do have this new pact on migration and asylum, but it is now necessary also to implement. And the implementation will be very complicated, but it's necessary. It's fighting against illegal migration, but trying to get more legal migration because we need skilled workers. As I said, of course, we have to go on with the way we are working on economy, but also on our democracy, all the human rights and so on. But, and now I come to the last, and I think one of the most important points is financing. How do we do financing? And here, Draghi also comes up with ideas that are very, very interesting, saying that has to be, on the one hand, a new EU budget. With 1% of GDP, we cannot finance all of that, so we will have to see how the member states will react to that. On the other hand, we also have to find more private investment, and the way we have to do that is also by changing the governance of the European Union. And here I must say this will not be easy, but we have to face this enormous challenge that is there if we really want to become a strategic player. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And I think you have really outlined the framework of the discussion that I'd like to have today. I mean, first of all, I think we can all agree that we want a strong or even stronger European Union. But I think what you've really highlighted is the importance of the European Union having stronger security, which is something I think that's been a discussion for many years. But, how to, and you eloquently put together, how does the European Union coordinate with NATO to make sure that this can happen? And finally, I think one of the things I'd like to point out that you said is even on defense spending. I mean, I think when there's a war on the European continent, if you want to help our friends and allies in Ukraine, but you don't have the capability to provide the military assistance they need, it creates an issue or a problem. Even in the United States, there's a large military-industrial complex. To keep up with the needs of providing assistance is extremely difficult. So thank you for putting that, framing that together. So I'd now like to turn the floor over to Viktor Yushchenko. First of all, Mr. President, I want to thank you for your leadership and also to thank the people of your country for what you have shown to be strength, resilience, and courage in the face of a war in your country. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Пані головуюча, дорогі друзі, дорогі колеги, для мене є велика честь бути серед вас.
Madam Chairman, leadership of the organization, dear friends, it's a great honor to be here with you.
Щоб зекономити час, я хотів сказати, що я безумовно підтримую тих більшість ініціатив, про які ми сьогодні говоримо.
To save time, I do want to say that I agree with all the initiatives that were discussed this morning.
Моя думка заключається лише в тому, що якщо ми питанню безпеки і оборони не дамо належного місця в нашому плані гуртожитку,
I want to start by saying that if we do not give the issue of security its rightful place at the beginning of our discussions,
ми багато програємо тих тем, про які ми зараз говорили.
We will not be able to accomplish much in many of the other topics that we have discussed today.
Якщо ви порахуєте, що забирає сьогодні війна,
if you count today how much this war is costing,
то цих коштів кратно вистачає на реалізацію більшості тих програм, про які ви говорили.
You could use this money to realize almost all the programs we've discussed today.
Ви знаєте, що головні гроші сьогодні забирає військовий бюджет.
Because right now we're spending most on our military budget.
Починаючи від Росії, починаючи від України і починаючи від наших партнерів.
And this includes Russia spending ours and our partners.
Війна – це зло.
War is evil.
Вона занадто багато бере грошей.
And it takes away so much from other necessary things.
Вона змішує наше життя.
It messes up our lives.
Тому я дуже хотів би, щоб ми серйозно віднеслися до того факту.
So I want us to very seriously consider the fact
що останні 11 років у Європі йде війна.
That over the last 11 years there has been a war in Europe.
Війна люта.
It's a furious war.
Війна, яка простяглася на 2000 кілометрів фронтом.
It's a war that has a 2,000-kilometer front line.
Вона мільйони людей виселила із своїх рідних міст.
Which has displaced millions of people.
У нас знищена на 80% генерація.
That has destroyed 80% of our energy generation.
Ми втратили найбільшу в Європі ядерну станцію.
We have lost the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe.
Ми втратили найбільшу в Європі гідроелектростанцію.
The largest in water power, hydrogen-powered station in Europe.
Кожний літр бензину чи солярки, яку треба заправити українські автомобілі чи техніку, треба завести з Польщі.
We have to import all the oil, the gas and diesel we need for our transportation.
У Харкові ми почали будувати, вдумайтесь, підземні школи.
You know, in Kharkiv we now have to build underground schools.
З України вивезено більше 700 тисяч дітей.
700,000 of our children have been kidnapped.
Ми пробуємо повернути їх додому.
We're trying to bring them home.
Але вони проходять, по суті, концтабори у Путіна.
But they are going through Putin's concentration camps and re-education.
Нам вдалося встановити 27 тисяч дітей, які через Крим вивезені.
We know the names of 27,000 children that have been taken out of Ukraine through Crimea into Russia.
Це прямий геноцид Росії.
This is Russia's genocide of our country.
Тому Міжнародний кримінальний суд виписав ордер на арешт Путіна.
And that's why the International Criminal Court has called for the arrest of Putin.
Мені приємно, що світ починає пізнавати, що Путін – це фашист.
I am glad that the world has realized that Putin is a fascist.
Причому я зараз не емоційно кажу.
And I'm not saying that in an emotional way.
Я хочу адекватно говорити.
Because I want to speak rationally.
Путін – це злочинець.
He is a criminal.
Який біля себе організував злочинне групування.
Which has created a criminal gang.
Яке чинить терор.
Which is terrorist.
Незалежно від того, яке ваше громадянство.
And it doesn't matter what country you live in, what your citizenship is, you could be attacked.
Людина 25 років на вищій посаді Росії.
A person who's been in power for 25 years.
Це вже майже Бог.
And there he's almost like considered a god.
Конституція переписується під нього.
He has rewritten the Constitution.
Кожен раз голосування йде на пеньках.
He controls voting and election systems.
І кожен раз підтримка його буде більше ніж 87%.
And his vote count will never be under 87%.
Одним словом, це зло.
It's evil.
Яке погубило, на мій погляд, кращих російських політиків.
It's an evil that has destroyed the best of Russian politicians.
Для мене був найкращим російським політиком Боря Нємцов.
One of my closest friends was the Russian politician Boris Nemtsov.
Він довгі роки працював біля мене.
He and I worked together for many years.
І я скажу, це одна з кращих мрій для росіян була.
And that was the Russian dream, is having someone like him come to power.
Але, на жаль, його вже немає.
But he's not even alive today.
Немає кращого журналіста Росії Анни Політковської.
The greatest politician in Russia, Anna Politkovska, murdered also.
Немає багатьох уже політиків.
So many politicians
які могли б
who could have
хоча б якусь частину Росії і змінити.
Changed Russia even a little bit are all dead.
І тому я мушу сказати, що сьогодні є проблема не тільки сам Путін.
So today there's a problem not just Putin himself.
Насправді є проблема аналогічна, це 140 мільйонів російських громадян, які по суті є маленькими Путінами.
But the problem is the 140 million Russians who you could call them little Putins.
І трансформувати Росію швидко
And to transform Russia quickly
дуже важко.
will be too difficult.
Особливо через політичні проекти.
Through political means.
Але ми повинні весь час пам'ятати,
But we have to always remember
що Росія – це тюрма народів.
that Russia is a prison of nations.
Я по своєму народу хочу сказати, що в 20 сторіччі ми 6 разів проголошували українську
Because,
незалежність.
as you know, we understand them because we ourselves in the 20th century declared our independence 6
5
times
разів її у нас забирали.
and have lost it 5 times.
Як правило, це була Росія.
All because of Russia.
І тому кожний наш рух національний починався завжди з одного гасла – подалі від Росії.
So our policy throughout the centuries has always been further away from Russia.
І ми пробуємо так зараз жити.
And that's how we try to live today.
І я вам хотів сказати, що моя українська нація сьогодні надзвичайно консолідована.
And I want to just say to you that our nation is consolidated and unified as never before.
Ми ніколи не були такими цільними, як є сьогодні.
We have never been a single unity, have the same unity that we have today.
Чомусь я переконаний, якби ми були в 90-х роках такими,
I know that if we had been like we are now, but back in the 90s,
ми б сьогодні були там, де Балтійські країни,
we would be where our friends in the Baltic countries are
де
today,
Чехія, де Польща,
or that Poland or Czechia are,
де більшість східноєвропейської демократії.
where the majority of Eastern European democrats are.
Але я переконаний, що ми ці іспити подолаємо.
But I know we will overcome these challenges.
Прикрість, яку я завжди в своєму серці ношу,
But the difficulty that I have to carry in my heart
це коли ми в 94-му році добровільно відмовились від третього в світі ядерного потенціалу,
when we gave up in 1994 the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world,
і вважали, що це ми робимо велике політичне діло для світу,
and we thought we were helping the world end the Cold War and bring peace
бо ми ставимо крапку у холодній війні.
and end the war.
Назад ми отримали гарантії країн ядерного клубу,
And in return we got guarantees from the world community of nuclear powers
щодо нашої територіальної цілісності
about our territorial sovereignty,
і повного політичного
integrity,
суверенітету.
our political sovereignty and territorial integrity.
На жаль, це не вдалося.
Unfortunately, it didn't happen.
У 2008 році, коли Україна подала заявку до приєднання щодо плану ПДЧ,
When Ukraine tried to enter NATO in 2008,
нам відмовили
we were turned down,
разом з Грузією.
along with Georgia.
Путін гарно почитав це послання
Putin got the message,
і через 2 місяці заводить свої війська в Грузію.
and a couple of months later, he invades Georgia.
Я до сьогоднішнього дня не розумію, чому так поступили з країною.
I don't understand why this happened
І з Грузією, і з нами.
with Georgia and with us.
20% Грузії анексовано.
20% of Georgia has been annexed by Putin,
Там розміщені російські війська.
and that's where the Russian
В
army
Південній
is,
Осетії, Абхазії.
in Ossetia and Abkhazia.
Те саме твориться в Придністров'ї.
We're seeing the same thing in the Transnistria,
Те саме твориться в Сирії,
in Syria,
в країнах, які окуповує або приймає участь у військах російська армія,
where Russian army is involved,
і Мянма, і
and
Центральноафриканська
other countries
Республіка.
like the Central African Republic and Myanmar.
Одним словом, сьогодні Росія втягнута більше, ніж у 10 військових
There
конфліктів.
are 10, we talked about conflicts in the world. Russia is a part of 10 of them.
Так ось, коли ми не могли отримати ПДЧ,
When we weren't able to get the NATO action plan,
Путін заводить війська в Грузію,
and Putin invades Georgia,
а через декілька тижнів
but a few weeks later,
Газпром Росії підписує базову угоду з газовими компаніями Німеччини, Франції,
the gas companies of Germany and of France sign an agreement with Gazprom of Russia
по Сєвєрному потоку-1.
about creating Nord Stream 1.
Приходить 14-й рік. Путін вводив війська в Крим.
Then what happens? In 2014,
Потім Донбас.
Putin invades Crimea, Donbass,
І через 1,5 місяці з тими ж самими компаніями, з той же самої
and those same
Німеччини,
companies in
Франції,
Germany and France
підписується угода «Сєвєрний поток-2».
signed the agreement to create Nord Stream 2.
Часто канцлер Німеччини Меркель тоді повторювала.
The Chancellor of Germany used to repeat, Angela Merkel, it's only business.
Так цей бізнес приніс за останні 12 років Путіну
This business has brought Putin over the last 12 years
більше $3 трильйонів.
more than $3 trillion
Кожний день
every day
із західних партнерів
from Western partners.
За нафту і газ Путін отримує $1 мільярд.
Getting $1 billion every single day.
Кожний день.
Every single day.
Тепер ми запитуємо, звідки творяться ноги такі агресії, яку він веде сьогодні.
So, and where does this aggression come from?
І тому в якості завершення я хотів що сказати.
So, how I want to end.
У нас є два варіанти, як шукати дорогу виходу з цього пекла.
There's two ways to look how to get out of this hell that we're in now.
Ми можемо повторити, зробити аналогію політичних кроків, які світ зробив, наприклад, в 1938 році,
We could repeat what the world did in 1938,
коли ряд західних держав
when a group of Western leaders
дуже придалися політики умиротворення Гітлера
decided that they were going to create peace with Hitler
і підписали Мюнхенську угоду,
and signed the Munich Agreement,
яка, на мій погляд, стала самим брудним дипломатичним проектом Європи в 20-му сторіччі.
which became the most shameful European agreement of the 20th century.
Пригадаєте, коли прем'єр Британії сходив з літака і показував цей папір.
As you maybe remember, when Chamberlain left the airplane and showed this piece of paper,
Він щиро вірив, що він мир привіз.
he really believed he had brought peace.
Як його через декілька днів поправив Черчилль,
And when Churchill told him,
ти привіз ганьбу
you brought shame
і війну.
and war.
І через рік почалася війна.
And the war started a year later.
Найбільша в історії людства.
In the greatest in history.
Я остерігаюсь подібного умиротворення
I'm
Путіна.
afraid of these same kinds of peacekeeping with Putin.
Я переконаний, що в Європі немає жодної країни, яка б могла розписати своє майбутнє, коли поряд живе фашистський путінський режим.
As long as there is a Putin's fascist Russia, I don't think that any European country can make serious plans for its future.
Тому я займаю позицію дуже ясну.
So I have a very clear position.
У нас повинен бути план перемоги,
We have to have a victory plan,
відповідно до якого Україна перемагає,
which ensures that Ukraine
а
wins,
Росія зазнає поразки.
and just as importantly, that Russia loses.
Все решта, я думаю, буде просто політичний блуд.
Everything else will be political foolishness.
Тому я хочу всім подякувати вам, у кого не байдуже серце до
Thank you to all of you who
процесів, які
care about what's happening in Ukraine.
на Сході. По-друге, Путіна найбільше живить людська байдужість.
You know, Putin thrives mostly when people don't care.
Бо це той найбільший внесок, який робиться політиці Путіна.
Because that's the greatest donation to Putin is the lack of response and caring.
Тому я закликаю всіх і кожного не бути байдужим.
So I call on you to not be apathetic,
Не
but to care.
забувати, що сьогодні антипутінська коаліція складає 54 держави світу.
Don't forget that the anti-Putin coalition today is made up of 54 countries.
Це країни найкращої демократії.
the countries that represent the greatest democracies in the
Ми
world,
зобов'язані перемогти.
and we must win.
У Другу світову війну антигітлерівська коаліція налічувала 53 держави.
This is even bigger than the anti-Hitler coalition during the Second World War.
Тому я дякую вам.
Thank you.
І будьмо небайдужі.
And please continue to be involved.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for those very frank words. And I think you mentioned during your remarks that this has made a very united Ukraine. But I think your discussion of the coalition of uniting countries together to support you has been also very important. And I can tell you from traveling in Asia and, Japan and Korea and hearing how they want to support and have supported Ukraine is extremely important. So I'll stop talking because I know our time is short, and I'll turn the floor to former Prime Minister of Belgium, Yves Leterme. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and in the same interest of time, I will limit myself to some remarks, 6 remarks, pointing at the fact that I can agree with most that has been said by Bettina, and of course I'm very impressed by the testimonial by Viktor Yushchenko about a situation where it's not about a philosophy and about a theory of war, but it's part of the daily lives of people. So I really pay respect for Viktor's intervention. 6 remarks. Number 1 may be a little bit surprising. I always get a feeling when we talk about where Europe and the European Union is heading towards, that we forget that lots of fundamental developments that kind of dilute European power and pose the challenge of the geopolitical role of the European Union are in fact very positive developments. I would like to warn for the proximity and negativity bias. I think we should have the courage also as European leaders to tell, or former leaders, to tell our electorate that when we are discussing about how can we still be strong in the world as European Union, well, the fact that since the Second World War, economies like Korea, like Japan, China, and others have gained traction is a very positive development, and it's in the interest of the European Union. I was thinking just this morning when I was 10, 11 years old, I remember that we were asked in the classroom to collect tinfoil, silver tinfoil, to help the Brazilian poor people. And I remember in 2010, when I was looking for refinancing the Belgian debt, that Dilma Rousseff came to offer me Brazilian money. And I see today that Brazil is leading brilliantly the G20. These are positive developments. First remark. So when we talk about how can the European Union get its acts together to be more leading in the world, let's on the other hand be happy that other nations have joined the spectrum of geopolitical leaders. I would even hope that in my lifetime we could say the same about Africa and other blocs in the world. Number 2, second remark, we should always, and I think that Benita has pointed at it, remember that the European Union, the European integration, is still work in progress. Benita pointed at the enlargement discussion, where I think that we should continue to invest in enlargement, merit-based, but I think it's not worth continuing to have the attitude of putting our head in the sand, so we should continue. But this proves that our territory as European Union is not fixed yet. The same goes for the citizenship of the European Union. Issues like migration, we have not sufficiently worked on it as European Union. Last but not least, let's not forget that the core of the discussion and decision-making within the European Union, especially when it comes to security issues, is still intergovernmental conversation. Or, not to elaborate on security issues, when we talk about our CHIPS Act, the US has its CHIPS Act, massive investment in semiconductors. We also now have our EU CHIPS Act, but only 10% is real European money. It's always the intergovernmental way of cooperation which explains a little bit the sometimes frustration we have when we look at the lack of efficiency and effectiveness. And so we have to work on enlargement, on migration, on deepening the cooperation. And I think to summarize it, it would be good if the European Union would be a little bit more big on big issues and smaller on small issues. I was reading last week the mandate letters for the new commissioners, the 26 new commissioners, 26, yeah, plus the President of the European Commission. When you read these mandate letters, and with full respect for Madame van der Leyen and for everybody that has been negotiating these tasks, so to say, of the future commissioners, I must say that 50% of what I read there, I find is really details which should not be addressed by bodies like the European Commission that have more or less the intention to be the executive body, not a government, but the real executive body of 350 or 4 million inhabitants. 3, when it comes to the economic development, once again, I would like to agree with the analysis that Benita has put forward. We have a lack of technologically driven productivity gains. If we have productivity gains, it's because our labor cost is so high that we had to massively invest in more efficiency and produce more effectively and efficiently. We should now really invest indeed in more productivity gains based on real technology, technological progress. The fact today is that you have 2 blocks, a US block with the Googles, Facebook, and so on. And on the other hand, a Chinese block with comparable things like WeChat and so on. And in between, our Nokias and Ericssons have disappeared. And so we indeed have to put a lot of efforts in trying to catch up, and we should aim at bringing all the energy together to make it possible in the next 5 to 10 years to again have productivity gains based on technological progress in our internal market and also in terms of our competitiveness for exports. Of course, number 2, we have outsourced vital parts of our economy, and we should reshore. And I think the American friends have shown the example. You should do this in a very rapid way, massively, and with indeed some public money. But at least the Americans are doing it quite successfully. Why aren't we capable in Europe to do the same? And of course, I also agree, third point in this third element on the economic development, it is that we are the regulatory superpower. Nothing can happen in terms of progress and innovation in the world, or the first reaction is by the European lawmakers is to have a framework and have a white paper and have a green paper and end with directives and all kinds of regulation. And of course, our market power still makes it possible, still gives us leverage to set the rules for future development in these domains. But in between, we insufficiently invest in real progress. Number 4, number 4, NATO. Of course, and I say it as a citizen of one of the founding member states of NATO, like we are a founding member state of the European Union and a founding member state of the United Nations. There is no alternative to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It has proven its effectiveness. However, indeed, we should invest more in defense. And the 2% GDP points, we have been pledging it, and I have been pledging it, but not acting in accordance to the pledges. And we should, on a realistic scheme of maybe 5, 8, 10 years, we should indeed come to these investment in defense. Footnote, not to continue to subsidize the donors of the presidential campaigns in the US, but also having sufficient attention in building up a European-owned defense industry. Today, 80% of our expenditure in defense is to purchase weapons and systems and services of UK and US firms, and this should change. Number 2, in terms of NATO, I think the moment is also there to have a discussion of clarifying the role and the mandate of NATO. I think during the last summits, there were some leftovers in the conversation, in the discussion about the mandate. I would say that for me it is important when we talk about the geopolitical role of the European Union, that it is not, that there is not a kind of creation of a gray zone where the geographical mandate of NATO is kind of increased by activities in the Southeast China Sea or other parts of the globe that are not really fitting into the definition of the North Atlantic geographical zone. Number 5, I think foreign policy and geopolitics is much more about interests than about values, and we can regret, but it's a matter of fact. And we as Europeans, at least some of us, still have the attitude of trying to teach the world how to behave, starting from the preperception that we behave almost in an ideal way. I think we should try to do more efforts to leave that kind of attitude, to put it aside, and to, in the interest of our own citizens, to be aware of the fact that foreign policy is also about defending interests. And if we can do this in a multilateral way, of course, it is ideal, it is better, but let's see how we can better take into account interests when we talk about values, and about these values, of course, also try to avoid doublespeak. When we talk about the Global South, this is, I think, an incrimination that is completely right when they point at the kind of doublespeak we as Westerners, globally speaking, but certainly as Europeans, handle. Last but not least, and it's of course not in accordance to the importance of the issue, but I would like to underline here again, because it hasn't been said by the colleagues until now, I think we should be more active, and more active in a dynamic way, also as people, as ordinary citizens, former leaders. We should speak louder about avoiding to be part of the antagonism between the US and China. Europe deserves, or European citizens deserve, an own stance in that kind of rising antagonism. Of course, the US will never allow that other nations than the US are leading the dance in the world. And China is re-entering history. And so these two elephants are there in the room. But there is space for more, there is room for more, and I think it would also give us a lot of opportunities, offer a lot of opportunities for alliances and for better cooperations with other blocs in the globe, if we would have an own position different of the one of the US in addressing the consequences of China re-entering history. I leave it there in the interest of time, Madam Chairperson. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And I just, on your last comment, I think Europe can play a very important role in trying to keep tensions from rising between the United States and China, because I think, if we look at common interests, it's in all of our interests to have good relations between the U.S. and China. So our next speaker is former President of Bulgaria, Rosen Plevneliev. So, Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan. By agreeing to what my predecessors have said, let me bring some basic facts and also priorities, problems that the European Union will face for the next 4 years, just to get the big picture in place. Just look at the facts. 15 years ago, the European economy was the biggest in the world. Today is number 3, lagging completely behind US and China. If you look at competitiveness, 15 years ago, Europe was 95% from American competitiveness. Today is 75%. If you look at energy, European Union was blessed by cheap energy, flooded. Today, the European companies and citizens pay at least 300% more, 3 times more than American consumers and companies. If you look at the situation on different fronts, you will see the results of decisions have been done and problems that the European Union is facing today. On migration, usually the European average on integration of every single migrant in the European Union is 35%. Canada has 85%. That tells you that the European migration has failed 3 times in efficiency than the Canadian one. And basically, people that come to Europe, they don't integrate with European social systems. They don't find a job. If you look at energy, the European Union will continue to play a very expensive energy. And I just look at what happened a day ago where Chancellor Scholz met the German unions, and the pledge and the plead was about coming back to a very cheap sources of energy, thus telling us that they're going back to have a kind of a deal with Russia. This will be a very big drama. What is going to happen with the European Union and how to understand the situation also depends, of course, on the American elections. Yesterday, Trump addressed his voters, and you know what he said? I quote Trump yesterday, "Germans, I'm coming for your jobs." And I quote Politico yesterday. So now, if you look at the way Germany today is just hitting the wall, by all the basic foundations of the economy being hit in a very big drama. Germany was facing very cheap energy, now today is the most expensive one. Germany was facing migration, the most inefficient one. They just don't integrate people into the system. Their social problems are very big, and that gives the rise to populism. And also in Germany, of course, if you look at the top 10 most strategic areas of strategic innovations, speaking about innovations and added value, actually Germany is not there at all. Big data, chip production, software to artificial intelligence. The European Union was very good on regulating artificial intelligence. We are very proud of that, the first in the world, EU AI Act. But we're not good on technology. We just don't get it right in every aspect. A lot of homework to be done. Do we understand the problems? Yes. Are we going to deliver on that? We will see. The European way of doing that, as I witnessed in all those years, was we were very good on addressing the problems. We were not very efficient on solving them. And here is more drama to come. Not just that Trump is going probably, I would say, with 65–70% probability to be the next president of the United States, but also looking at the situation that Germany is facing elections next year. And here we have the situation with a raging, brutal war in Ukraine in the middle of Europe. And the Germans will be heavily under pressure to do something about that before the elections. On top of that, we might, I just recently spoke to the advisor of the President Macron, who I met 3 weeks ago. He said, we're quite sure at the Élysée Palace that actually if Trump is going to be elected as a president of the United States, the first thing he will do, he will call Putin, he will meet Putin, he will say, well, that's America first, not my war, it's European war. I pull out of that war. I pull out. And then, of course, just imagine what kind of pressure will be coming to the Europeans to find 50 billion a year to keep Ukraine afloat, to continue investing in defense, in competitiveness, and so on and so on, and try to find their own way. On top of that, the biggest drama ever, I might surprise you, for the Europeans will be actually, are we going to create a capital market? Because there is no other way for us to fund anything that we believe is right for united, peaceful, strong, competitive Europe and a European Union. And just if you look again today at the reaction of the Germans when UniCredit launched a takeover of Commerzbank, which is the second biggest German bank. There was a debate yesterday in the German parliament, in the Bundestag, and they were talking, even the Chancellor Scholz, about a hostile takeover from UniCredit, which actually I would say is a wonderful thing to happen, because that's the only way for us, the Europeans, to have bigger banks, more efficient banks, and actually to change the way we do business in Europe, as the American investment banks and some others do. So that is why the reaction in Germany does not make me an optimist about are we going to have the ultimate weapon, the nuclear weapon of European Union to continue making history. It's not our regulation. As many people would like to say, European is very strong on regulation, that's true. But we need a stronger, united capital market that will allow us to fund hundreds of billions for Ukraine, that will allow us to fund our defense capabilities, that will allow us to fund our startups, to make our own innovation engines, and the European Union, after hard work and a lot of reforms, to really become a global player, global power. I would wish this to happen. I would wish that Mario Draghi will not be just sharing his idea, but this will become a plan with actions and results year by year by the European Commission to deliver on what we believe is important, as the European Union has to become a major player in a changing world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those very good remarks about the importance of markets. So for our next speaker, we have former Foreign Minister of Serbia and former President of the UN General Assembly, Jeremic. He's here somewhere.
Thank you very much, Susan, for the introduction, and thanks everybody, especially friends from the Nizami Gajami family for continuing to organize this important meeting on the margins of the General Assembly. I think that, you know, having those kind of meetings, productive, requires honesty on behalf of the participants. So I'll be honest, and I'll break with the previous speakers, at least in saying that I agree with everything that previous speakers have said. I'd like to disagree, as a matter of fact, about one thing first. I don't think this is the first time after the Second World War that we have this kind of intensity of a battle. Perhaps not over such a big terrain, but for those of us from the Balkans, we did have very intensive battles similar to the Second World War during the tragic decade of the 1990s. For us in Serbia, the most traumatic one was 1999, of course, when there was a military intervention against Serbia, essentially an attack on a sovereign country. And I remember 2008, because President Yushchenko mentioned the Bucharest summit of NATO. I was representing Serbia as a foreign minister at the Bucharest summit. And I remember being in a very challenging situation because literally in weeks prior to that summit, a number of Western nations have actually ceased to recognize the borders of our country in the context of the unilateral declaration of independence of Kosovo. And so we did also have an experience of being attacked and our borders being challenged ever since as a result of an external attack. So I beg to disagree that this is the first time, and of course this makes me feel much more sympathetic for the position of Ukraine, given that I come from a country with a similar experience. Now, the second thing that I am not sure I could agree with is some of the propositions that the previous speakers said about the future of European defense policy in the context of the Russian invasion. I think that ending in a good place, in my opinion, would require some kind of discontinuity in ways that we're dealing with the situation. I'm not here to defend the government of Russia. I'm not sure that I'd be comfortable comparing Putin with Hitler, but I know that there are people who do for some reasons that I can respect and understand. But at the same time, comparing Putin with Hitler and saying that Russia must be defeated brings to mind thinking whether we should be overly ecstatic about that victory coming close. Because if Putin is to be compared to Hitler, what comes to my mind is what Hitler would do in his bunker had he had access to the nuclear weapons in 1944 and 1945. So I know that a lot of people are saying that the Russians are bluffing in this regard. I can understand that logic. I was, as a matter of fact, on Friday with Susan in a TV show, and we talked about whether Russia will or will not support the Pact for the Future. I went for a dinner after that TV show, and there were several high-level representatives, diplomatic officials of EU countries at that dinner. That was Friday night. And the prevailing sentiment was that Russia is bluffing and that they're going to support the Pact for the Future. Well, on Sunday morning, it turned out to be the case that Russia wasn't bluffing. And yes, Russia was successfully outmaneuvered with the help of the African Union at the opening of the Summit for the Future. But I'm not sure if this should, give way to celebrating the victory, the diplomatic victory, in the same regard, in the same way as we should have been celebrating the Pact of the Future adoption had it been done really by consensus. I honestly believe that ending of the war, this one in Ukraine, because this is the one that we're discussing, we're talking about Europe, just as well as ending other terrible wars that we are witnessing these days, these weeks, and these months, is an absolute prerequisite to make any kind of meaningful progress in the context of the Pact for the Future or otherwise. Because, just like Mr. Moratino said, the Pact of the present must come before hopes for fulfilling the Pact of the Future. And the Pact of the present would require, getting to the Pact of the present, meaning getting to a peace that is a prerequisite for further discussions, in my opinion, requires some kind of discontinuity. One of discontinuities that I am proposing and raising in the context of the EU enlargement, because EU enlargement was mentioned here at the beginning of the panel as well. I really think twice before underlying that Ukraine membership in the European Union is something that can happen within, say, my lifetime. I'm pretty conservative when it comes to the Western Balkans' prospects of acceding to the full membership of the European Union in the near future. And I fear that Ukraine might be perhaps even in a more complicated situation with regard to the prospects of acceding to the full membership in the European Union. Now, continuing to make this promise for a long time without actually delivering on it had very negative effects in the Balkans, in my country in particular. I would hate to see this kind of disappointment happening in Ukraine, because the stakes are, of course, much bigger for a number of reasons in that part of the world. So having said all that, I hope that nobody's going to take offense from my remarks. I honestly believe that we need to find ways to sue for peace, and that we need to do it quickly, and that continued escalation or continued running into the war of the sort that we discussed in this panel would put us in a very, very, very dangerous situation sooner or later. And it's good to be preparing for contingency, to increase defense spending and all that. I couldn't agree more with those who proposed that. But I hope we're not going to remain blind to the imminent dangers that we are facing if this is just continued. And let alone if a nuclear power starts believing that they are on the verge of losing everything. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. And I just want to say, you know, this is one of the advantages of the Nizavi Ganjavi International Center, is that we want to hear differing points of view, and it's a safe place for people to listen to others and try to understand their points of view. So thank you for that. And we are the only people standing between you and your lunch, so I would like to wrap it up as quickly as we can with the former president of Latvia, Raimonds Vejonis, and not to say that he doesn't can speak as much as he wants, but please, the floor is yours, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Already my colleagues mentioned many remarks on this issue, but I would like to highlight four points. First, Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine highlighted a growing need for EU to play a bigger role in security and to seriously rethink its own capabilities. Faced with new security reality, EU already made significant steps to advance its defense industrial capacity, military mobility, resilience. EU efforts to reinforce the defense industry include adopted legislation on support of ammunition production, common procurement, and these efforts are essential both not only for our safety but also for the capacity to better assist Ukraine's military needs. The second point, a strong Euro-Atlantic bond, close EU-NATO cooperation and consultations are of particular importance. It ensures better preparedness for crises and disruptions too. The third point, EU with its broad range of non-military tools can complement NATO's efforts and contribute to NATO's collective security and defense capabilities. This is opportunity for EU to fulfill its role of the security and resilience guarantor in such areas as energy security, critical infrastructure, hybrid security, cyber security, fighting disinformation. The fourth, in the war situation, close EU cooperation with like-minded partners, both international organizations and individual countries, is more relevant than even ever, and it is rewarding because EU promotes stable, developed and secure neighborhood policy for EU countries, and of course including beyond the eastern border, which is very important for us, and we can mention and remember the Moldova signing the security and defense partnership with EU earlier this year. It just shows how important is this thing. But when we speak about Europe, of course, we must all the time remember also global issues, because Russia's actions and behavior undermine international law, institutions and frameworks which were designed to prevent conflicts, to ensure peace and stability. And I think it's very crucial to preserve existing agreements, such like treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and to re-engage on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. But of course, despite that, the war continues, and we are seeing signs of brewing problem. What it means that some leading countries of continental old Europe are roaring with initial decisiveness and numbers of hardliners. It is clear that the problem grows. This trend will only take hold, and accordingly the main question is whether the old European countries will be able to maintain their current position. The name of topic is a new EU shaped by war. What means new or, however, old EU or old Europe. I think we are facing a dilemma because we see that some countries start looking for compromises with Russia on the issue of Ukraine, or to maintain a principled position until the end of the war. And I think in this situation the answer to this question will determine belonging to new or old Europe. But finally, I think we must remember that Russia is a permanent threat to global security and stability. Russia will not stop. Russia can only be stopped. As already Viktor said. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to all of our participants for a very informed discussion, and we need another 2 or 3 hours to continue this. So thank you very much, and I turn the floor over now to whoever is going to coordinate our lunch discussion.